One thing we do know is that AI is not just a technology revolution, it's a cultural one. So as we move faster, as we optimize more, and as we automate almost everything, how do we not lose the human touch at the center of it all? And that's what this next keynote is going to explore. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Dave Finnegan and Lindsay from Litmus7.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. It's good to be here. Thank you especially to our partners. We're grateful to be here. We thought what we would do today is start with brief introductions, and then we're going to jump into a fireside chat. So, Lindsay, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lindsay Palmer. I actually just joined Litmus7 2-3 weeks ago. So I was formerly at Target, where I was leading Gen AI product development and previously leading traditional AI product development. And then prior to that, I was actually started my AI journey around 15, 16 years ago with what we used to call big data and analytics and price optimization, customer insights, and segmentation. So happy to be here. That's a little bit me.
And my name is Dave Finnegan. I'm part of the Litmus tribe. Before Litmus7, I started my retail career decades ago. I helped to start Build-A-Bear, if you know that brand. So I'm a big experience guy, helping to start Build-A-Bear. I was over technology and the store of the future, and a lot of these interactions that we've talked about today. I had that responsibility at Build-A-Bear. I left there to go to work for a brand called Orvis, which is an outdoor fly fishing brand, where I was the experience officer for some time there. I left there and took an anthropology trip for a year, backpacking around the planet, interviewing tribes and scientists and in the Galapagos and Antarctica and different parts of the world. Met with the oldest librarian of the oldest library in the world at the Monastery of St. Catherine. That kind of trip. When I came back, I got into private equity. I do work with NRF. I'm an ambassador there, and I also am part of the tribe for Litmus7. So very, very into connections, and and experience is really, really important to me. I also, on the side, I joke with people that I study anthropology at Harvard. I have one class a semester for the rest of my life. That's my program. So I have class tonight, in fact. So when it comes to culture and culture conversations and experience, that's what's my background. That's why we're talking about it today. So I'd love to jump in and kick off, because I feel like this is such an important conversation. What's really, really awesome about what we've heard so far, I took a ton of notes from the other speakers, which was very helpful. One of the things that I noted was, content has doubled in the last 12 months. And that's exponentially changing, right? So it's not only going to double in the last 12 months, but it's exponentially going to change. So content as a part of who we are and how we tell stories is more important than ever. However, good content is the difference, right? Tone and human connected content that actually connects with others is the difference between good and okay content. And so we heard that loud and clear in the last speakers, and so I really, really appreciate that, and it really resonated for me, having been a content guy for a long, long time. But I'd love to kick it off with a question for Lindsay. One of the awesome things. So I started at Litmus just a few months ago too. So we're both pretty new to Litmus, but we love Litmus7. It's a brand that's helps people with implementations and things like that. It has a NPS score of 92. It's a hugely valuable brand, but which is why we work there. We love it. But what's interesting about Lindsay joining Litmus7 is, coming out of Target. Lindsay, I know you did some research when you were at Target, where you were analyzing not only what your culture was, but also what the Walmart culture was when it came to adoption of technology and thinking about AI. And so the first question is, give us some insight into what you learned from a culture perspective between those two brands, and and how that culture helped with adoption.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to steal a page from my Hibbett friend who made a wonderful cliche earlier, and I'm going to do it. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I know that's kind of a cliche, but I do believe that company culture does predict business outcomes. I formerly worked at Walmart as a vendor when I was part of IBM and a startup called Demand Tech doing price optimization for Walmart. So I've experienced both Walmart and Target's culture, again, being at Target for 5.5 years, working in-house. And the biggest difference I saw in culture was Sam Walton, when he founded Walmart, he knew that he could differentiate himself based on technology. There's an awesome Acquired podcast. I'm a total nerd. I love Acquired.
I'm a big fan too. It's a great podcast.
Yeah, so I highly recommend listening to the Acquired podcast on Sam Walton, because they go through the initial framework of how Walmart became what it is today. And Sam Walton knew that he had to embrace technology as a differentiation. And as we heard from our AWS friends earlier, and Amazon, I think, is very similar. So Walmart and Amazon, they have this culture of technology first, but Target, on the other hand, is very much a culture of bringing the guest joy. As a Target tech product person and Target tech leader, I had to always think and build in the mind of how can I bring the guest joy. And so I don't know if one culture is better than the other, but I think we can see business outcomes, and there's a story there. But one of the good things about Target from a technology perspective, I'm based in San Francisco. I worked out of our innovation lab in Sunnyvale in the Bay Area. And as part of the innovation lab and Target Tech, we had a mandatory 50 days of learning. And so within the tech community, we had this innate kind of mandatory culture of learning and exploration. And that's actually how I got into Gen AI. I was working on new item forecasting and on-demand forecasting, and vision models were becoming a thing. We were exploring all kinds of vision models. And I was like, well, I think we could use this with item similarity. And so my nerds and I got together and we started playing with visual similarity and working on history, using the history from visually similar items to do new item forecasting and improve the on-shelf availability of new items. And so that product actually didn't end up succeeding and moving into production, but because we had that culture of 50 days of learning, it didn't matter. And Target has somewhat of a fear of failure because as every retailer, you do new things. Sometimes things fail. Target went into Canada, didn't work out. There was a huge data breach in 2013. So culturally, there is a huge fear of failure and repercussions of failure. And so one of the ways that we were able to work around that and build a culture of experimentation was this mandatory 50 days of learning. And we kind of left it up to our data scientists, engineers, and product people to decide what they wanted to learn. And in my instance, it was Gen AI, which led me to my last role in leading product development for Gen AI.
Very cool. So we're doing this research, again, on the anthropology side, doing research. What's interesting about where we are as a human race right now is we're going through not a technology change. I know people have said this, but I think actually every presentation said people in their presentation, if you notice that. We're not just going through a technology change. This is not like going to the cloud or mobile tech. This is a cultural change. And at its scale, it's about the size of the Cultural Revolution to go from farm to factories in the United States, around the world. That's a huge, huge human change. It means that people think differently about how they work. They are worried about how they work. They're worried about how their jobs are going to be affected or what the future looks like for them. It also means that there's tons of opportunity in that. And we know from history, by the way, that it always comes out positive, net positive on jobs. But going through this process is extremely challenging for people to go through. We're in that today, and it's happening today, right? So it's a huge cultural shift, and it's a really cool time to be alive, to say I was there during this cultural shift, because we're seeing it today. So the question is, how do you think from a culture perspective, I know you talked about a culture of innovation, but from a culture perspective, thinking about the people part of the equation and thinking, okay, how do we help people to navigate a cultural shift, not a technology shift, but a cultural shift?
Yeah, at Target, one of the first things that we did when we decided that Gen AI was going to be an enterprise initiative was to give as many people access to Gen AI tools as possible that were approved by legal and security. So immediately, I think almost all employees received access to Microsoft Copilot. And then we had a pilot of maybe 20,000 employees receiving ChatGPT enterprise licenses. And honestly, I think just giving people access and letting them play, I think as humans, we are naturally curious. We like to play and have fun. And so giving these tools to our teammates, to my teammates at the time, I allowed them to experiment, be curious, and think about the ways that they could solve their problems on their own. And, those that were anxious, when I started working with our marketing team, there was a lot of anxiety around, is AI going to replace me? Am I going to lose my job? And so one of the first things that we did was just hold a series of learning sessions that were, they could attend or not attend. They were all recorded. And we went through external learnings and trainings as well as internal trainings. And what we found is to be most successful was actually our internal champions, the ones that were embracing the technology, the ones that were coming up with new ways to work with GPT or with Microsoft Copilot. Those received the most engagement and also started to kind of assuage the anxiety that people were going. And that actually reminds me, there's Ryder, the Gen AI enterprise provider, has an awesome podcast called Humans of AI. And we shared this podcast with our marketers. There's a specific one from Maximus where they go through and did internal testing for copy and said, okay, choose A, B, or C, which is the best copy. A was humans only, B was Gen AI only, and C was a combination. And the combination won hands down. And just telling them, our marketing team and the copywriters, this story, and giving them access to the story itself in the podcast, it just changed the pulse in the room, and we were able to get a lot of our teams to embrace and move away from anxiety and embrace the technology and the rewrite that we were going through. And so I think no matter what your problem is, if you can give your teams access, if it's a CDP problem, if it's a copy problem, give them access and let them start playing, because a lot of the times what we saw was internal teammates who had the creativity and the interest were coming up with better solutions than just us as tech people. And so that was one of the best ways that we found to involve and get over the anxiety.
I love this for a couple of reasons. One is, we can learn from our history, right? From the last time we had a cultural revolution like this. Those that navigated the educational part of this and embraced what it meant to learn the next thing, helped greatly to navigate this next generation of what it meant for culturally. So I love the idea of creating some space for innovation where the team gets to take hours out of their year to say, I'm going to go learn something new and do something new. I also love the idea that you gave them the tools early on to do that and to learn. Just stepping back, I was asked by a company who's a famous footwear company to come in and talk about AI. And when I went in there, their CIO was in there and their chief security officer was there. And those were the people that were there to meet me. And I was surprised to hear how they wanted to lock down AI or get their arms around AI. And I get it. I've been a CIO before. I understand that. But felt like that stance of locking things down instead of letting people play would be detrimental to them. And it's kind of proven out to be that way. So I'm glad to hear that. It's really interesting. So one of the things that I also saw in the past is, especially when I was doing Build-A-Bear, we were doing a store of the future concept, and tons of innovation labs were popping up. Everybody had an innovation lab, and this is what it looked like. And it had a beanbag chair in there, and there was some foosball, ping pong tables in there, and open bar if you were really lucky. Anyway, it was these really cool spaces in these companies, and I saw them pop up, and they've kind of gone away a little bit. I'm wondering how you think about innovation groups or innovation labs inside of organizations, and how to take things from talk about innovation that's dependent on one group to think about it and apply it more globally to the entire organization. How do you think about that, or how did you do that at Target?
Yeah, it's funny because I was in the ping pong innovation lab at Target, based out of Sunnyvale, California. And it was interesting, specifically with generative AI. Initially, Target engaged with Bain, and Bain had a list of like, these are the top 10 use cases, and you should do these. And so for the most part, we started on that path. But what we saw and what we found and experienced was the generational trauma. It was coming to the surface in specific areas of the business that had kind of like a lot of trauma and fear, anxiety around Gen AI. And we actually, in hindsight, I think it was fine to start that way, but we had people who we'd given access to ChatGPT Enterprise and Copilot who were kind of waiting in the wings, and they wanted to work with my team and I. And so we did the quick pilots of the initial use cases, and then we went to the people that were already embracing Gen AI and had ideas. And one of these products that I worked on initially has been getting a lot of press. It's called Trend Brain, where we would take unstructured data from fashion shows, trend documents, so everything that's like a year and a half into the future, compare that with our structured data of historical performance, and then buy into those. And I noticed today there were many women wearing this color green, which we actually bought into in the pilot because of this Trend Brain tool that we worked on. So it's kind of nice to see that in real life as well. But these people that we worked with and the product team for Trend Brain were deeply in love with the problem. They had an idea of what the solution would look like, but they were so in love with the designers that they worked with, the Own Brands team, that was so successful because they were so in love with their problem. And like you're 11, you want to be in love with the problem, not the solution. And I feel like the Innovation Lab, a lot of what we were getting from outside counsel was, you need to do this. You've got this solution. You've got to do this thing. But what we found was most successful was when we worked with people who were in love with their problem, whether that was the Own Brands team working on Trend Brain, or with our copywriters. At lunch, I was talking to several people about image and video creation. Our creative team was so passionate about the new technology. And so that's, I feel like, how you get out of the Innovation Lab is working with product teams and people who love their problem, and you can help them find an iterative solution.
Well, what I love about this is it's like an internal influencer marketing program, right? You choose the ones that have the most influence, the most energy, and you feed them, and they help the organization to change. Really, really cool. Okay, last question. What are the 3 things that we can think of that you would give as advice for us to think about how to make cultural change with AI?
Yeah, so I had mentioned earlier that Target innately had a fear of failure because there had been so many failures in the 2010-13 era. And so I think the biggest takeaway is embrace failure, encourage failure. When we first started with Gen AI at Target, there were a lot of failures, but we learned a ton from those failures. So I think the key is to fail fast and embrace that culture. So as a leader, if you have a team that's experimenting with something, ask them, okay, why did it fail? Express curiosity so that you can, continue to iterate and find the right solution. I think especially with Gen AI, there's no such thing as throwaway work. If engineers fail solving one problem, it's going to help them fix it and iterate and create the next best thing. So embrace failures for sure, number one. And then I think number 2 is invest in your data. One of the first products that I worked on was a SQL generation tool where we were trying to query our data. So if you have Snowflake Copilot or GitHub Copilot and you're trying to query your data and your data is a mess, it doesn't matter how great Gen AI is, it's not going to work. So I think if you're even just embarking on your Gen AI journey, invest in cleaning up your data, invest in metadata asset tagging, and enhancing that so that Snowflake Copilot will work for you and your company.
Can I add to that one really quick? So I headed up a think tank for NRF with a bunch of CDOs and CIOs and things. And we were all talking about different things that we were doing with AI. And every time we had a conversation, it came back to, but my data is really bad. Or I need to do something with my data so that my AI is better. And so that's one of the things that I appreciate about Ambulance from a data and flow perspective and pipeline perspective is because you help to make sure that the data is right in that conversation and personalization and things like that. And so it was amazing how many people are running into this problem of making sure that their data was right. So spending some time there, I think it's good advice. What's your last one?
The last one, like I mentioned with the Trend Brain team, is embrace the people who are embracing Gen AI, no matter where they're at in your organization. If it's an executive assistant, if it's someone in finance, like those people that are embracing Gen AI, coming up with new and unique solutions, embrace those people and let them speak to your company, their peers, because that's one thing that I think really worked well for us at Target is not necessarily myself as a tech leader or my teammates. It was the business people who had completely embraced the technology and they got their peers on board. So definitely embrace those change makers.
Okay. Everyone, it's been a pleasure to be with you today. We'll be around if there's questions. We can talk this afternoon. But give it up for Lindsay for being on the stage and give us some insight.